Hi, I'm Lori Annis. I'm a 2D and 3D digital artist specializing in video game assets with Timefire VR, and today I'll be demonstrating a process for modeling flexible, modular streets for you to use in an MMO. To begin, I'm setting up my workspace. I hide unnecessary clutter, and in my Scene tab, I set my units to metric. In User Preferences, I enable a handy add-on that imports images as planes, and then I set the scale of my mapped plane to 1 kilometer. Having maps that are drawn to scale in advance prevents confusion as you work. On my team, at least 2 artists work on maps, one to hand draw the concept and one to translate that drawing into a digital format, making sure that street widths, sidewalk widths, curb height, and spaces for buildings are drawn to a realistic scale. I'll be modeling my streets to be 5 meters in width with sidewalks at 2.5 meters wide each, with a curb height of 15 centimeters. So I'm checking to make sure that my map imported correctly with space for streets approximately 10 meters across altogether. Here I'm deleting the pieces that I won't need in my final modular street section. I add a mirror modifier and enable the display of edge lengths, and set my street section's maximum height and width. I've set the length of each piece to half the width so that I can keep most of my quads fairly square. I cut in the edge loop that will become the top edge of my curb, and selecting the inner street face, I extrude downward to my desired curb height, zooming in so that I can see the smaller grid units, and using Ctrl and Shift to snap the face in position. I delete the extra faces created by the extrude operation, and then I move my entire street piece upward in the Z-axis. Selecting just the top faces so as not to alter the height of the curb relative to the street, I lower the overall depth of the street piece, somewhat arbitrarily in this case, since in my game the surrounding geometry is going to lie flush with the top edge of the sidewalk. Now we're ready for unwrapping, so I mark a seam between the street and sidewalk. I also take a moment to apply my object's scale before unwrapping. If you ever get skewed UVs unexpectedly, you may have forgotten that step. Otherwise, a basic unwrap operation on a quad model like this is very straightforward. In edit mode again, select the street face, tap U to unwrap, add a material and texture to your street, and select your new texture in the UV viewport to make it visible. Depending on your model and texture, that may be all the work you need to do. In my case, next, I select my sidewalk faces and unwrap again. In the UV view, I constrain my UVs to the image bounds, slide my UVs to the sidewalk half of the texture, and then I set my 2D cursor to the far right side of the image and choose my 2D cursor as the pivot point so that when I scale my UVs in the x-axis, the transformation is constrained on the right-hand side. Now's a good time to add a simple bevel to the curb edge if you like, and then so that my street UVs aren't mirrored, I'm going to go ahead and apply my mirror modifier, and resetting my pivot point to the medium for just a moment, I'll mirror my UVs on the x-axis. And because my street texture tiles twice vertically and once horizontally, I'm going to scale down my UVs to half the height. And finally, I'll place them side by side in the bottom left quadrant of the texture. Now my modular piece is complete and ready to be snapped end to end for placement on the map. So I add an array modifier, and I set the relative offset to 1 in the y-axis only. I'm also going to name my street template, save my project, and move my template piece off to the side. Then I'll drag a duplicate onto my map and begin laying out my streets. Everywhere that I need a longer section of street, I increase my count to the appropriate amount. Note that you can increase the count one at a time or scrub the count box for faster stacking. From there, it's just a simple matter of taking the time to lay out your streets to match your map, leaving generous overlaps wherever you need an intersection, or if you need extra length to accommodate a curve. The beauty of this method is that you can increase and decrease the length of your streets until the very last step. I'm not going to make you watch me fill in the entire map, but you should have a good idea by now on how to get started. In part 2 of this series, I will show you how to get straight street sections to conform as smoothly as possible to these tricky curves using a curve modifier on your array. And finally, in part 3, I'll demonstrate a clever method for joining 2 streets at an intersection. Between the 2 of those videos, I'll discuss properly cleaning up your meshes so that they're ready for export to be used in your games. That's it for part 1. See you next time.